Welcome to another special edition of ALN Thursday at 3. Today we're going to be talking about past federal executive presentations, and we're going to have a special tribute to Bob Holcombe, who is no longer with us, but was a critical element in getting the Asset Leadership Network connected to the federal government when we first started in 2013. More on that coming up. And then we'll have Rich Culbertson joining us to share some comments also. And anybody online who wants to put into the chat what your favorite federal presentations have been, or if you want to become a panelist and talk, let us know in the chat. First, we'd like to start by thanking all of our sponsors, our members, the patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI. And of course, all of our organizational members, including Guidehouse and Kahua, who do a lot of federal work, and Andrew James Advisory Group, which has done training for federal agencies. And typically we don't do a lot with slides, but we are going to go into some slides just to get things started here. But before we get started, the reason why we're focusing on federal presentations is next week, and actually another date has been added on November 21st. We're doing a focus on federal leadership insights, and that registration is available on the front page of the ALN website. You can just click on this image and it'll take you to registration. And we're very pleased that highlight will be a presentation by Byron Dunlop, and I've got his name spelled wrong there. Sorry, Byron. I will make sure to get that corrected. He's the enterprise asset manager for the Architect of the Capitol and has guided the ISO 55001 certification of the John Adams Building in the Library of Congress. We're also going to be having next week presentations by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, and Amelia Secoy, who used to be with the GAO, is now an ALN member and will be facilitating that presentation, including Keith Cunningham, who has been a stalwart federal GAO presenter to the ALN events and will be again this year. And on the 21st, we'll be talking with the National Institute of Building Sciences, which has a digital twin conference in the Washington area, December 9th through 11. And the ALN has members that are involved in that, and they've asked the ALN to be with them. So that's definitely a strong federal push to maximize the value of digital twins. And what that requires for maximum value generation is asset management governance. And on the 21st, we'll be talking more about that. We have a survey that's national based that we can talk about also. But this week, we're talking about our federal presenters. And I mentioned Bob Holcombe. He was with the General Services Administration. Rich knows him from the early days of getting ISO 55000 presented. And this is one of Bob's early presentations to the ALN. And I thought it was really good because it's about standards and federal asset management. So back in 2013, 14, 15, when Bob was given this presentation, there wasn't a full understanding of the impact of standards in the federal government. And the big secret sauce that everyone was talking about was, why about standards? And he says we have to, and that's as much a requirement by statute as the internal desire to improve. And so that's a double meaning of have to. But the thing that he was pointing out was that OMB Circular A19 requires that you must use voluntary consensus standards. And this was a big thing. We haven't talked about this much lately, but early on, everyone liked reminding that it's a requirement to use international standards, use the best practices available. And Bob was bringing that out in the presentation that he made. And then because standards weren't very familiar to everyone, he really broke it down to the ISO standards, which he called very high level and strategic, describing what must be done, and ASTM standards that can dovetail with ISO requirements that answer the how question. Rich, does this do a good summary of the use of standards in the federal government?
It certainly does. And if I were doing this slide again, I would also put in there, the internal controls aspects of that are required of all federal agencies, that are provided in the GAO Green Book. And then accompany that for audits to make sure things happen and there's assurance that the agents are doing what they're supposed to. That's the GAO Yellow Book. And so when you take those three areas together, and there's a plan or strategic asset management plan of objectives, and eventually as internal controls to meet those objectives. Then part of that would be ISO standards and ASTM standards. Now, the ISO standards are, the ISO 55000. That's a management system standard.
Rich,
That's a high level. Yes.
we want to talk a little bit about Bob Holcombe, a little bit of a tribute.
Now,
He's no
yeah, but
longer
see,
with us, but
yeah.
what a great big teddy bear of a guy he was. Just always nice and so supportive of the Asset Leadership Network.
Yeah, I think what you find though that within the asset management community, there are those who really stick out as far as their support of overall asset management. One of the things I think Bob initiated, with GSA was the Interagency Committee on Property Management, and this is a user group or whatever, all the federal agencies, and they still get together today. Matter of fact, I had a meeting yesterday, which I also attended, of how to make property management, asset management more effective, efficient, and better within the federal government. And a variety of topics for that. And so, we do stand on the shoulders of great people who came before us. And
And
Bob
Bob
was certainly
set
one of
that
those.
up, and you were just working with it. He had quite the lasting impact.
He sure did. In other words, he got the ball rolling and it's still rolling today on this type of stuff. And so it's uh very important that people get things started,
And
for the
Bob,
benefit of those who come after us.
yeah, another Bob that was involved early on was Bob Leach. He was the asset manager for the Army Corps of Engineers, the Civil Works Department, and he was following ISO 55000 back when it was past 55. And he got an ad hoc group together, federal group that still meets and they present uh, to the ALN on a regular basis, including next week. We'll be having some federal asset management executives talking with us. Bob Leach's group was the first federal agency group that was actually using ISO 55000 and presented in 2015, I believe, on how they're using ISO 55000. And that group that Bob set up, Bob is now with Woolport. He's not with the federal government, but that still meets on a regular basis also. So let's go back to sharing some things. We've had a embarrassment of riches in terms of presentations from people such as Admiral Thad Allen. We've had the GSA Public Building Commissioner present numerous occasions, both Dan Matthews And will you help me, Rich? Who else am I
Well, I
talking?
would mention Admiral Allen just a little bit because I think he did present at some of our gatherings, and he said something that always kind of sticks with me. That about transparency basically drives self-correction or breeds
Trans-
self-correction.
Transparency of data breeds self-correcting behavior.
And that's a if it's recognized what that is, and therefore one thing I've always said too that push knowledge because people are responsible for their knowledge. So continue to push knowledge, but also what Admiral Allen was saying is that make that sure that's transparent. And that in fact drives self-correction. One of the things I also do, in a lot of cases is that I subscribe to IG reports, whether they be Treasury or transportation or energy or those things, just to
Internal
see.
guidance reports, is that what that
Well,
is?
no, they're internal audit reports.
Okay,
Internal audit.
you got to
Uh,
say what IG stands for,
yeah.
though.
Uh, Inspector General.
Ah,
Yeah, the inspector generals without the government are assigned, and they're supposed to be impartial, and they're the watchdogs, you might say, of operations within the federal government, and they in fact do audits based upon the GAO Yellow Book, and those are published. And again, whether they fund good things or bad things, but they're meant though to improve continuous improvement to operations. Sometimes they find things uh, that can be embarrassing. Fairly recently, the Department of Transportation had
Rich,
some
Rich,
some of
we're
that.
talking about the things that we have presented. And one of the
Yeah.
people that you wanted to have us talk about was Wendy Payne, when she was executive director at the Federal Accounting Standards and Advisory Board. She was able to speak to us, and you liked the fact that she spoke with us. What was your?
Well, sure. See, again, all of these things are connected, whether they be internal controls or whether they be audits or accounting. Wendy Payne was the director of FASAB, and that's the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board. And so that's generally accepted accounting principles for the federal government. And I met her, around 2000 when that organization was just starting, and uh, that led to other involvements and that sort of thing. But she was a very very knowledgeable person. Retired about 3 years ago, but led that whole organization to. They probably have some like 50 standards at this point, and it's important. And again, she's one of those major people over the years that's contributed not only accounting but also asset management. If you look at the FASAB standards and you look at their index, a large portion of those have to do with the management of property or the accounting of property, and whether that be intangible items or tangible items, or leases and those things. And so it's important to know that federal officials know about asset management, know about ALN, know about ASTM, know about the international standards. And at the same time, there's back and forth where we try to, in fact, participate in some of that to where we both get better.
Yes. And we've had good participation from the Department of Defense. And a couple times we had Amber Probert, who is property accountability specialist with the Department of Defense, speak. And why? So she spoke a couple times, and that's a lot of personal property to be accountable for. All of the Department of Defense. That covers all the agencies. And she was talking about policies that are in place. And I've got some recorded video from her that we're going to be sharing in just a second. And then also Chris Vick has been a regular contributor to our presentations. He is not available next week. He'll be traveling, But again, we've got a couple of highlights to share from Chris.
Yeah.
And I, yes, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. I was going to mention though, along with Amber Propert, in that organization within DOD, was Tom Ruckdaschel, who also was part of that organization, early on, from about 2000, probably up to 2013 or so. And but one thing he did too, though, he put in policy, uh, DODI 5000.64, which has to do with personal property, the use of the ASTM standard 2279, and that standard references ISO 55000, 55001, 2, 0, 1, and 2, and it's not only mentioned, but it's a requirement. It's not voluntary; it's a requirement. Uh, and so those things are important that they get around, they're acknowledged, and people act upon them. And as a result, asset management in the federal government is better than it would have been otherwise.
And here we've got Jim Dieter asking Amber a direct question. Let me know that you can hear this when I start playing it, Rich.
Okay.
That's another thing. You can't go for where everybody's happy. You have to go where everybody's satisfied.
Yeah, yeah. And that, in the development of 55,000, there was a lot of blood shed along the way. But I do think we ended up with a document that wasn't a lowest common denominator, but that reflected, the best thinking from around the world. Some of the rough edges knocked off as we bumped our heads together and things like that. You think there's any prospects in the foreseeable future around 55,000 in DoD?
I think that when we get our arms around nailing down our process maps and our internal controls, then it'll be a very short leap from taking that world of knowledge and applying the 55,000 to it and saying, look how it already dovetails. We've already taken all of our hard work and we've identified our controls and we've looked at where our risks are and we're doing things to try to mitigate the risks. Then you can show them just exactly how that standard supports the effort.
So she was pretty had a lot of foresight because now the Department of Defense has a Director of Facility Asset Management, and that's a new position. And I believe there's going to be a policy written in the DoD for all of the services that addresses asset management. So things move along, and not necessarily at the pace that we want, but they do move forward. And I am going to see if we're going to be able to get Chris Vick. This is one of my favorite highlights. And Rich, let me know if the sound is working for this one.
I reported last year about the Reclamation Transparency Act. Tucked in that act was a requirement for the Bureau of Reclamation to report on its repair needs across the agency over a 30-year period. Our first report to Congress is called the Asset Management Report, was due to Congress March of 21. We published that, we provided to Congress in March of 21. Didn't really hear much. And then this new $1.4 billion infrastructure bill came out, and Congress referenced that asset management report developed by the Bureau of Reclamation. They took it word for word, pulled out our needs over the next 5 years, and included that data directly in the infrastructure bill. So the Senate passed that bill. I think everybody's aware it's currently with the House being debated pretty vigorously. We're hoping that passes. If it does pass, it's an opportunity to address all of our repair needs over the next 5 years, about $3.2 billion, which would be just amazing for our agency.
And it did pass, and it was amazing for the agency. So the ALN gets to play the role of reporter or publisher and let federal executives share their information in a forum that is comfortable and suitable for them. I don't know, Rich, if you have any favorite presentations or executives other than the ones you've mentioned already.
Yeah. I don't know that I think that the presentations, Thursday at 3 have been helpful. People do attend them. They're recorded, and and it's important to record because these presentations that we're giving there, these two are assets. And so it's important that the useful life of those assets are more than a half hour, and therefore that they're available, out on the web, and so those things become assets. And at the same time, if individuals want to see those, uh, they're available. But and Mike, perhaps you can say how they become available, or Nick can show how they're available. I never searched.
That is what I was going to next. So thank
Okay.
you very much for that lead in. I'm going to share my screen again. And I hope you're seeing our website presentations. So we've got the search engine up here, and pretty much type in a name or an agency or airports or highways, and then it'll bring you to presentations and web pages. But this one has Keith Cunningham, and Keith has been a federal executive with the Government Accountability Office, who has been a strong supporter of the Asset Leadership Network. And he is presenting also next week with the Government Accountability Office. And really appreciate his insights and input. And of course, we've got to mention Amelia Shakoy, who is presenting next week as an ALN member. She's facilitating the program. But her presentation on the 19-57 or 58, I always forget which one it is, -57 report on federal asset management. And when that report came out in 2018, there was just an explosion of interest from federal agencies on that subject. And it's not possible for us to present everything that we have seen over the years, but we wanted to give a little bit of a flavor of the different presenters and the different types of presentations that you might be able to anticipate next week also. The main interest is in the executives' direct words to the public. And it's an honor for the ALN to be the forum where federal executives feel comfortable talking about their asset management initiatives, their successes, what their challenges are, and the fact that they're willing to share all that information through the Asset Leadership Network to the public. So that's the general overview of what we're going to be covering today, and a hint at what's going to be coming from next week. So if there aren't any further comments, Rich.
Well, I was going to say that I think with the ISO management system standards, that is a very good process to disseminate knowledge. And of course, how that works, under the World Trade Organization, you have about like 150 nations who signed up to that, including the United States as one of the original signatories of it. But anytime you take a particular topic of a management system, whether that be quality or whether that be safety or whether that be environmental or asset management, or you go on, for many, many of those. And I think what it is that once you have volunteer countries say, I want to contribute to asset management, and so for ISO 55000, we had probably like 50 countries who participated in. And those meetings usually had like at least 60 people attend those meetings. Then so you have the best as experts in the world convening to try to do a worldwide effective, efficient asset management standard. And so you basically get the best knowledge throughout the world to try to do that. Now, again, people invest quite a bit in that. You know, those who participate invest in it. Countries can investigate it. Individuals participate and invest in it. But what comes out though is that when people want to know about a particular topic, those topics are readily available. And that's always anything. If you focus on something, you'll get better at it. And that's the same with asset management, inequality, and some of those other things. So that's some of the things that I think that's really important with ALN, that we continue that process to disseminate knowledge and enthusiasm and wisdom. It's certainly easier to learn from somebody else's mistakes than your own.
Rich, that's a perfect way to circle back to our opening tribute to Bob Holcombe and how he had it in his slides that the Office of Management Budget Circular A119 requires that federal agencies use the collected wisdom of the world and not rewrite their own standards. Use the international standards that are already consensus based. And he really started us off in our outreach to the federal government in a very strong way. We miss Bob Holcombe dearly. He, like I said earlier, he was a big teddy bear of a guy, so gentle and nice, and very supportive. And thank you, Rich, for all the support you've given. You've shared your wisdom and advice with the Asset Leadership Network. Appreciate that. And all the attendees who came out today and the ones who will be seeing this in the future. And we'll see you next week. We're starting on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And that'll be with Byron Dunlop to get us started before we go into the GAO program. So thank you all and have a good week.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.